Assalamu alaikum. In this lecture, we are going to talk about respiration and respiratory systems. First of all, why respiration? What is the need of respiration? As we know that organisms, the living organisms, needs energy for their requirements. They have to always conduct metabolic reactions, catabolism, anabolism. As we know that catabolism is a breakdown of materials to produce energy. Anabolism, the reactions for production. All the catabolic reactions and anabolic reactions, the energy producing reactions and the metabolic reactions, somewhere needs a gas exchange. There are many gases are involved which have to be transported from outside the body to inside or inside to outside, and so on. Respiration is a complex process, and we divide the respiration into two major forms, two major types: cellular respiration and the organismic respiration. What is respiration? If we precisely define it, this is a process which involves exchange of gases in living organisms. Respiration is one of the most important functions in the living organisms. This is of two types, as I previously said: cellular respiration and organismic respiration. Cellular respiration is the respiration at cell level. In the cell, there are energy producing reactions which starts from usually breakdown of a glucose molecule into smaller materials, into smaller molecules, resulting in release of carbon dioxide and production of energy. Some processes which are involved are called glycolysis, electron transport chain, Krebs cycle, and so on. We call this process, all of these processes, cellular respiration. Respiration at the cell level. The other one is organismic respiration. Organismic respiration is actually, in other words, breathing or ventilation. The breathing movements, the movements of body which causes the inhalation or influx of air inside the body, and then removal of air from the body after some time, and during this time the exchange of gases takes place. So respiration is of two kinds: cellular respiration and organismic respiration. And cellular respiration also consists of two types, which are aerobic respiration and the anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration, in which oxygen is utilized. Oxygen is required for the metabolic processes involved in aerobic respiration, while in anaerobic, as the name says, anaerobic, oxygen is not required. These processes takes place without the presence of oxygen. There are few organisms that conduct this anaerobic respiration, mostly prokaryotes. For example, bacteria. They conduct anaerobic respiration, and even oxygen, if they have to live in an environment where there is oxygen present, they are killed because they don't have certain enzymes to handle with the oxygen, with the presence of oxygen, because due to some metabolic reactions, they produce some toxic products in presence of oxygen, and they cannot break down those toxic products. This is the reason that these organisms cannot survive in oxygen. We call them obligate anaerobes. Even in some parts of human body, the anaerobic respiration occurs. In our muscles, sometimes when our blood is not sufficient, for example, we are exercising and our blood supply is not sufficient to provide enough oxygen to our exercising muscles, then these muscles have a capacity to conduct an anaerobic respiration to produce their energy. But usually the result of this energy is, because the products of anaerobic respiration are usually acids and alcohols, lactic acid is produced in our muscles, and if we continue this activity, this exercise for a longer period, for example in sportsmen, this may result in lactic acid accumulation in the muscles, which usually causes us pain in our muscles after exercise. So this is the difference between cellular respiration and organismic respiration. In this lecture, we are concentrating more on the organismic respiration, how the gases are exchanged from environment to organism and from organism to environment, and on different surfaces inside the organism, which are made for the gaseous exchange. We know that organisms are aquatic or terrestrial. Some organisms live in water. We call them aquatic. Some organisms live on land. We call them terrestrial. For example, fish are aquatic organisms. The lions, for example, are terrestrial organisms. There is a difference between the respiration on water and on land. Water is much denser in comparison to air, about 8,000 times more denser. Air is very light. Air is much more saturated with oxygen in comparison to water. So it means that air have more oxygen present in it in comparison to an equal volume of water. That is why respiration in air is comparatively easier to access for the organisms, and the mechanisms are also comparatively simpler or easier. Now we look at respiration in different organisms. In plants, plants also conduct a process of respiration. In plants, gas exchange occurs by stomata in the mesophyll cell. Mostly in the mesophyll cell layer, there are openings called stomata. Stomata plural and stoma singular. For example, a surface of a leaf have many stomata on its lower layer in the mesophyll cells. These stomata are openings which are supported or around which present are some cells called guard cells. When these cells swell up, the opening is the pathway of opening is open, and exchange of the gases can take place. When these guard cells are shrunken again, they shrink, then the result is stomata are closed. Plants also have to, the plant roots also have to exchange gases. As we know that plant roots, these are present inside the soil mostly, though there are certain roots which are sometimes on the branches, but the roots in the soil have to absorb oxygen from soil. As we know that soil particles have certain pores in them, and in these pores oxygen is present. Roots absorb oxygen from the soil. Just like that, aquatic plants absorbs oxygen from their surrounding water. Have a look on the diagram, which shows that there is a exchange of water, oxygen, and carbon dioxide from the leaves. Roots are absorbing. Roots includes the tubers, which are the extended parts, for example, the potatoes. They also absorb oxygen, water, and minerals and other materials, the gases like carbon dioxide, with the soil. In animals, respiration is comparatively a more complex process. Animals, the most important thing for the exchange of gases in animals is the respiratory surface. On what surface? An epithelium, a lining, or any place, lungs or gills, where the exchange of gases occur. Exchange of gases occur on a respiratory surface. To be a respiratory surface, the animal's parts of the body, the surfaces, should have certain qualities. That surface should be very large, that is, should have a very large surface area. For example, the lungs in human beings. This should be moist. This should be kept moist for the exchange of gases, for the ease of exchange. These surfaces should have a very thin epithelium because gases has to be exchanged with the tissues and the blood cells. So there should be a very thin layer between the blood cells and the tissues. So thin epithelium is the second property. Then capillary network. The respiratory surfaces should have an extensive capillary network because exchange of gases takes place with the help of capillaries, which are so thin. We know that capillaries are so thin that they just consist of endothelium, that is a single layer of cells. The respiratory surface should also have a single layer of cells, so that exchange between the blood cells and between the air, exchange of gases, carbon dioxide, oxygen, or whatever, should easily occur. So these are some specific properties of the respiratory surfaces. Now we are going to talk about respiration in some small animals and in some large animals, just briefly. Here we can see in the slide, there are three small animals: Hydra, an insect, and earthworm. Hydra is a very simple organism. As we know that as simpler the organization is, as simple the processes are. In Hydra, there is just one cavity inside the body called body cavity or a gastrovascular cavity, as you can see in the diagram. And there is only one opening, mouth. Water enters through mouth inside the gastrovascular cavity, and the exchange of gases takes place with the inner layer of the cells, the endoderm. The outer surface of the Hydra also can exchange gases with the medium because they are aquatic and they live in water. So respiration in these organisms is simpler. Look at the next diagram of an insect. This diagram shows that insects have a more complicated but a very, very efficient system of respiration. They have a system of tubes or canals, which is called a tracheal system. These tubes are called trachea. They have openings from the body surface, and through openings there are cuticle lined canals which are moving in a very regular fashion throughout the body, almost transverse from the body, that is from one abdominal side to the other side, from left side to the right side, and so on, and up to thorax. These canals, because they are open directly to exterior, air can directly enter inside them. So these canals can have air inside through the openings. These openings called spiracles. Then the air can move out by a contraction of the muscles of abdominal cavity. This system is very efficient because these tubes move around and go close to almost all tissues of the body. And medium is simply the air inside the tubes. So exchange of gases could easily occur. This is a very efficient system of respiration. In earthworm, however, there are different canals, respiratory vessels, which are present near to the surface of the body. So the exchange of gases could easily take place directly through epithelium because the blood vessels are so close to the epithelium and epithelium is thin. They can easily exchange gases through epithelium towards blood and back. So in simpler organisms, respiration at organismic level is simpler. Let us talk about some larger organisms: fish, frog, and birds. Let us look at another diagram. Here you can see a fish. Fish, as we know, lives in water. They have to exchange their gases with water and not with the air. They have also a very efficient system for extracting oxygen and other gases and removal of these gases, the metabolic waste products in their body, and this system is called system of gills. The gills are actually surfaces, the respiratory surfaces. Water, as you can see in the diagram, enters through the mouth and passes through the gills, the gill arches, and the gill opercula. The gills, actually, the gill filaments, actually the gill consists of 5 to 6 filaments present on both sides of the head, just behind the eyes. and these are richly supplied with blood vessels. When the water moves through mouth and passes through gills, because gills are richly supplied with blood vessels, the exchange of gases takes place here. The fish have a single circuit heart. Their heart pumps their blood towards the gills, the gill filaments. And when this blood passes through the gill filaments, exchange of gases takes place, because that blood was deoxygenated blood which is coming from the body in the heart, and from heart to the gills. From gills, blood goes directly back to the body and do not come back inside the heart as in the other vertebrates, in the case of heart and lungs system. So we call it a single circuit heart. That is, heart receives blood from the body, contract and send it to the gills. Gills are richly supplied with the blood vessels, and water passes through these gills in larger quantities. So exchange of gases takes place there on the gill filament. Look at a frog. Frogs have two systems of respiration. One is the pulmonary with the help of lungs, and other is through skin, cutaneous respiration. Frogs, as we know, are a transition between the water living, that is aquatic, and land animals. Frogs have lungs, and you can see in the diagram in a very simple way that air enters through the nostrils, go inside the buccal cavity, and when air enters through nostrils, the buccal cavity's floor is raised. That is, moves upwards. The result is that air goes directly inside the lungs, and lungs are inflated. Lungs are again richly supplied with blood vessels. An exchange of gases takes place. Then frogs also have another type of respiration called cutaneous respiration. Their skin is richly supplied with blood vessels, and because these blood vessels are directly related to skins, they are directly attached to the skin, there could be a very easy exchange of gases that takes place. We call it a cutaneous respiration. So frog have two types of respiration: cutaneous respiration and a pulmonary respiration with the help of lungs. Next, we talk about birds. Birds have very high metabolic rate. Birds have to maintain their metabolism at a very high rate because they need lots of ATP molecules for particularly their flight activity. They have more specific type of respiratory system. Look at a diagram. It shows you that birds have lungs, which are very efficient lungs. Plus, these lungs, their surfaces, these respiratory surfaces are extended in the form of air sacs in the body. These air sacs even sometimes penetrate their bones. Birds have a very high capacity for acquiring oxygen from environment. Oxygen enters into lungs and the exchange of gases takes place. Oxygen enters into the air sacs and fill the air sacs, as you can see in the diagram. And this air is also used for the exchange of gases. So birds have a very efficient system of exchange of gases. Now, we are going to talk about respiratory system in human beings, the most complicated organism, human being, us. We have a complicated respiratory system. We have to conduct metabolic reactions all the time. In every second, many molecules are in the process of making, and many are in the process of breaking. We need all the time oxygen, and we have to remove our carbon dioxide. For this, we have a very efficient respiratory system. Now we look at various parts of respiratory systems. What parts actually makes our respiratory system? We have mainly lungs. Human beings are mainly the land vertebrates, the mammals, and human beings have lungs as their major respiratory surface and organ. The human respiratory system consists of lungs and air passageways. Look at the slide. We have lungs as our major respiratory surface. We have air passageways, which allows movement of air from the outside through nostrils till lungs. We simply name them. Air passageways are in human beings starts from nostrils, then comes the nasal cavity, then comes a tube, a muscular tube, pharynx, then comes another small tube, larynx, which leads into trachea. Trachea leads into bronchi. Bronchi leads into bronchioles, and then comes the alveoli, the smallest. The alveoli are the smallest parts of the respiratory tract, which are present inside the lungs. From bronchi, the passageway enters the lungs. Now we look at a diagram to observe various parts. Look at the diagram in front of you. It shows various parts of a human respiratory system. First of all, the air have to enter through nostrils in the nose. And there are two nostrils. Air enters through nostrils into the nasal passage. Then there is a muscular tube just behind the throat, which is called pharynx. Pharynx leads into a small box, which is also a sort of a tube, is called larynx. We know that larynx is also called a voice box because our voices, which are generated by us, are generated by the vibration of certain parts of this voice box at the larynx. But this also acts as a passageway for the air coming through the nasal cavity and pharynx and lead towards the trachea. After larynx, trachea comes. As you can see that trachea have ring-like structures. These rings are actually cartilaginous, C-shaped structures, and these help the trachea to not to collapse. Then trachea is going down through the thoracic cavity or the chest cavity, and then we can see that trachea branch into two. These two branches are called the bronchi. Now closely look at the diagram. Both of the bronchi are entering in the lungs. We have two lungs. We can say a pair of lungs, one on the right and one on the left side of the chest cavity. Trachea divides into two bronchi, and one bronchi each enters one lung, one on the right, one on the left. Then we can see that each bronchus, one of the lung is shown from surface on the right, and on the left, on the other side, the lung is shown in a cross section, in a cut section, which shows that each bronchus is divided into further so many branches, like that of branches of a complex or a very big tree. These branches are called bronchioles. Bronchioles then ends into sacs, spongy sacs. These sacs are called air sacs. Air sacs are the functional unit of lung, and air sacs consist of more small structure, microscopic structures, single-walled structures called alveoli. So this is about a generalized structure of human air passageways and the lungs. Now we look at the structure and function of each part of this air passageway and lungs one by one. So now we are going to talk about structures and functions of various parts of the passageways in human beings, and then the lungs, the nose and the nasal cavity. As we know that air has to directly enter inside the nasal cavity through nostrils. Air may have many dust particles, maybe some microorganisms, maybe different types of particulate matter. Nasal cavity is structured to handle all these problems. The nasal cavity have a ciliated epithelium. The epithelial lining of the nasal cavity have cilia on its surface. Secondly, this lining is mucoid. The cells of the epithelium secretes mucus. This mucus covers the whole membranous surface of this nasal cavity. The result is this, that air, when passes through the nasal cavity, it is filtered. It's all the dust particles, some microbes even, and some other tiny particles. They are trapped in the ciliated epithelium, which is also mucoid. So the dirt particles, particulate matter, some microbes remains attached to the surface of the nasal cavity due to ciliated epithelium and the mucus. So air which passes through the nasal cavity towards the next part, which is called the pharynx, is warm, filtered, and moist. Then comes the pharynx. Pharynx is a muscular tube. It's a muscular passage. It is also lined with a mucous membrane. The mucous membrane help to, we can say, filter and clear up the air a lot more. Air moves down the pharynx towards the larynx. Larynx is the next. Larynx provides for the respiratory system passageway from which the air passes down towards the trachea. The larynx have a ciliated opening. Its opening is also ciliated and mucoid, so air is filtered more. Larynx have some other property as well. Larynx is cartilaginous. It have cartilaginous fibrous materials passing across from one part to another part, which are also called vocal cords. These vocal cords, when they are vibrated by air, help us in producing our voices. So when we speak out, actually these vocal cords help us to produce different types of sounds by vibration of these cartilaginous vocal cords. But for respiration, larynx is ciliated mucoid pathway. So you can observe generally that the air is filtered, and the passageways, the function of the passageways is to filter the air, keep it moist, and make it clean as possible. Because the next part, lungs, in which air has to go, are so delicate and thin, and no dirty particles, no larger particles should go inside the lungs. So the passageways are ciliated and mucoid, and they clear up and filter air and make it moist. From larynx, air enters into the trachea, a long tube which is actually supported by cartilaginous rings. We should more precisely say that these are C-shaped cartilaginous structures which line almost all the part of the trachea, and they actually help trachea to maintain its shape and not to collapse when air is moving up, moving down. The trachea is a long tube. It goes from larynx, it starts from larynx and ends into a branching, into two branches, one towards right and one towards left, and these branches are called bronchi. The trachea divides to form bronchi. Bronchi enters into the lungs, and these bronchi also have the cartilaginous ring-like structures around. They still need to protect themselves from collapsing, because air is always going out, coming in. Breathing process, as we know, is a continuous process, always goes on. Then bronchi enters inside the lungs, and they are divided further into smaller branches. These smaller branches inside the lungs, when the bronchi enters inside the lungs, they divide into smaller branches. Then these smaller branches reaches a diameter of about 1 mm, 1 millimeter. Then these are called bronchioles. Bronchioles further divides into air sacs. Air sacs don't have any cartilaginous material to support them. They are spongy. Just like that, the bronchioles themselves have irregular cartilaginous plates. Actually, when the trachea divides into bronchus and bronchus divide into further bronchi, the cartilaginous rings they become irregularly shaped, and ultimately they makes irregularly placed cartilaginous plates at the ends of the bronchi. And the bronchioles and then the air sacs don't have this cartilaginous material. The lungs have millions of air sacs in the alveoli. Each air sac have actually extensions of its membrane, which are only single layered. These are called alveoli. The air sacs are called the functional units of the lung, and alveoli are microscopic structures. These are very small, and these are seen under the microscope. Due to presence of these millions of alveoli and the air sacs, the lungs are spongy in nature. As we know that trachea is hard, bronchi are hard because of the presence of the cartilaginous rings, but the lungs consist of so many air sacs and bronchioles and bronchi. The lungs generally are spongy in nature and not the hard structures, soft structure. Look at a diagram. This diagram shows one bronchus, which is supported by a cartilaginous ring though, but you can see that at the end of the bronchus, these cartilaginous rings are more irregular, and they become some irregularly placed plates. When the bronchus is divided into bronchiole, you can observe that there are no cartilaginous rings or plates. And then when the bronchiole is further divided into air sac, and air sacs extensions, the alveoli, as you can see in the top left diagram, there are no cartilaginous rings. These alveoli, air sac and bronchioles give the lung its characteristic spongy appearance. Then observe the next thing. From the right side of the bronchiole, a bronchus, a vein is coming down. This is actually bringing, this is the pulmonary arteriole, and this is bringing deoxygenated blood to the lungs from heart. And this is making a capillary network around the whole of the air sac, and then entering into a pulmonary venule. This pulmonary venule is going up and giving oxygenated blood back to the heart. Now, as we know that air enters through the nasal cavity, nostrils to the nasal cavity, to pharynx, to larynx, to trachea, to bronchi, to bronchioles, and to the air sac. So air sacs are filled with air, and these air sacs are surrounded by lots of a big network of the capillaries. Now, as I previously described, that capillaries have a single layered structure. Capillaries are a single layered structure. They have just an endothelium, and the alveoli are also single layered structure. So there are just two direct epithelia in contact. Exchange of gases at this surface is very easy to take place, and these alveoli and the air sacs actually gives a very large surface area for the exchange of gases. And as we know that every alveolus is surrounded by a capillary network, a very rich capillary network. So the exchange, the area, the respiratory surface for the exchange of gases is very high. So we have a thin epithelium in contact, two thin epithelia actually in contact, and we have very large surface area. So lung is an ideal surface for exchange of the gases. Structure of lungs themselves. How the lungs look like. Lungs are in pair, one right and one left. These are present inside the chest cavity. These are supported and protected by a rib cage. Because lungs are spongy, they are delicate, and the heart, you know that between the lungs, heart exists. So rib cage actually protects these two vital organs, heart and lungs. Lungs are also protected by another structure called pleural cavity. Lungs are present inside a membranous structure. We call this membranous structure pleural cavity. The membrane which is covering this pleural cavity are called pleura. The area between the lung and the pleural cavity is filled with a fluid, so that when lungs expand and contract during inhalation and exhalation, resistance should not be there. So this pleural cavity actually helps the lungs to reduce resistance while expanding and collapsing again. Below lungs, because lungs are present in the chest cavity, below the lungs, a muscular floor of the chest is present. This muscular floor is called diaphragm. Let's look at a diagram. You can see on the left side of the diagram that lungs are present on both sides of the chest cavity, and there is a surrounding membrane around them, pinkish in color. This membrane is the this membrane actually makes the pleural cavity. Down there you can see a muscular part just below the lungs. This is the diaphragm, and there is another more close look at the alveoli present inside the lungs. One alveolus, if you look at the diagram B, one alveolus is one air sac with its most of the alveoli is shown from the surface, and the other one is shown as a cross section, which is showing by arrows direction of movement of air through these alveoli. In the diagram C, you can see the two respiratory surfaces through which the exchange of gases actually occur. You can see a blood vessel, a capillary, with the two RBCs moving through it, and the surface of the alveolus. You can see that these are too close. These are very close to each other, and simply by diffusion, the takes place of materials, the gases oxygen and carbon dioxide, they are exchanged because these surfaces are too close to each other, that the exchange could take place simply by diffusion. Have another look on the lungs, the diagram. This is both cross sections. Now, breathing. For inhalation of air and exhalation of air, getting air inside the body and removing air from the body, this process is called breathing. So breathing is inhalation and exhalation activity of the lung, of the human beings. Lungs are spongy in nature, and these cannot pull or push air inside or outside, which means that lungs on themselves cannot pull air in or cannot push air out. These lungs needs help. There are two structures which help them. Now we recall that lungs are surrounded by the ribs, and on the lower side, on the posterior side of the body, lungs have a diaphragm, a floor of the chest. These two structures actually help the lungs in inhalation and exhalation. Look at the diagram, which explains the process of inhalation and exhalation. In the first part, you can see breathing in and breathing out. During breathing in, the muscles of the ribs contract. When the muscles of the ribs contract, then the chest cavity, which have ribs, moves outwards and upwards. That is, it is expanded. At the same time, the muscles of the diaphragm, diaphragm is a muscular structure. Diaphragm contract. When it contracts, it is become less dome-shaped. That is, it actually goes down, move towards posterior side. The result is that pressure in the chest cavity, because it is expanded, is reduced. And when this pressure is reduced, then the pressure on the lungs is also reduced. The result is that lungs are expanded. When they are expanded, air is pulled in. That is, from nasal cavity to trachea to bronchi and to lungs. We call this process inhalation, सांस लेना. That is के हवा को अंदर लेकर जाना. So these two processes actually help the inhalation. After that, when air is filled in the lungs, exchange occur, then the process of exhalation. Exhalation, सांस को बाहर निकालना. What happens in exhalation? The muscles of the ribs relax. When muscles of the ribs relax, then as you can see in the second diagram, when the muscles of the ribs relax, then the chest cavity, the ribs, actually the rib cage moves downwards. Then the diaphragm muscles, they also relax. At the same time, the muscles of the diaphragm, they also relax. When they relax, they move, the position of the diaphragm moves towards or changes towards anterior side. The diaphragm become more dome-like. The result is increase in pressure inside the chest cavity. When the pressure increases, the result is increase in pressure upon the lungs, because lungs are present in the chest cavity, and lungs then goes back to their previous position. The result is exhalation of air. Air goes out from the lungs towards bronchi to trachea and outside. We call this process exhalation. So inhalation and exhalation are actually helped by the intercostal muscles of the ribs and then the muscles, the muscular diaphragm. We call overall process as breathing or ventilation. When the air enters inside the lungs, then the gas exchange should take place, and the alveoli are the actual surface for gas exchange. Gases are exchanged against a partial pressure. That is, the difference in partial pressure results in the exchange of gases by diffusion. The blood is distributed around alveoli in very thin layers. Blood cells in alveolar air, they are in very close contact for exchange of gases. As we know that red blood cells have hemoglobin inside, and hemoglobin have a capacity to bind with oxygen to make an oxyhemoglobin. Oxygen diffuses into the blood capillaries and then makes a oxyhemoglobin. Then carbon dioxide, this is exchanged in the form of this oxyhemoglobin. Then tissues have to release their carbon dioxide inside the blood, which is the product of their metabolism. Carbon dioxide is a more dissolved, carbon dioxide is a gas which is more easily dissolvable. So this is present in the tissue fluids. From here, it enters into the blood capillaries. This is transported in blood as about 20% as carboxyhemoglobin, because hemoglobin have a capacity to absorb the carbon dioxide. 5% by some plasma proteins, that is 5% is bound to some plasma proteins, and about 70% as bicarbonate ions combined with the sodium. So there is a reaction that takes place, a carbon dioxide plus water. There is an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase which help in production of bicarbonate ions, and the bicarbonate molecule, and bicarbonate molecule is readily converted into its ionic forms, hydrogen and bicarbonate. Look at a diagram. This diagram shows a very close picture of an alveolus with blood capillary. As you can see in the diagram, first of all, an alveolus is shown. Then the second part, the B part, an alveolus is shown in a cross section. You can see that many capillaries are surrounding one. If we count them, these are 5. 5 capillaries are surrounding one alveolus. And from every capillary, one blood cell is passing. If we enlarge it even more, we can see that the blood cells are in a very close contact with the respiratory surface, the surface of the alveolus. So diffusion of oxygen and diffusion of carbon dioxide takes place simply against the gradient. Now we talk about various factors which can affect the gas exchange. These factors are carbon dioxide, temperature, pH. Carbon dioxide, as we know, when it is increased, it actually decreases the saturation of it actually decreases the oxygen tension, which result in the capacity of hemoglobin for oxygen, for carrying oxygen, is reduced. This result in release of oxygen molecules towards the blood. Second is temperature. Temperature, if it is increased, that is rise in temperature, decreases the oxygen carrying capacity of the hemoglobin. So, if temperature is increased, then oxygen carrying capacity of hemoglobin is reduced. So, if temperature is increased, that is rise in temperature, decreases the oxygen carrying capacity of the hemoglobin. So, if temperature is increased, then oxygen carrying capacity of the hemoglobin is reduced. So, if temperature is hemoglobin is decreased, and hemoglobin will release oxygen. And we know that the airways are sending a moist and warm air inside the lungs. This warmth result in decrease in oxygen carrying capacity of hemoglobin, and hemoglobin molecules releases oxygen, which is then taken up by the capillaries. pH, if pH declines, oxygen carrying capacity also declines. So because actually what happened that hydrogen ions, because when we know that when pH goes down, actually hydrogen ions are released in solution. These hydrogen ions actually bind to hemoglobin, to some part of it, to decrease its oxygen carrying capacity. So if pH is decreased, then oxygen carrying capacity will also, the hemoglobin molecule will also decrease. Now the lung capacity. The human lungs, while fully expanded, have a capacity of about 5 liters. But actually, when we are sleeping or we are at rest, lungs are only exchanging half a liter of the air. So very much less. While exercising, this exchange may increase up to 3.5 liters. It means that there is a 1.5 liter residual volume that cannot be expelled in any case. Inhalation, as we know, सांस लेने का जो process है, inhalation is 15 to 20 cycles per minute. If we are exercising, this may increase up to 30 cycles per minute. That is, we breathe rather than 15 to 20 times per minute, we breathe for 30 times per minute. So when we are exercising, then the capacity of lungs is definitely utilized and in a more efficient way. So this is about the lung capacities. Now changes in the composition of the breathed air. When we breathe air in and then this is expelled out, what is the difference? This air actually, we are talking about the difference of inhaled air and the exhaled air, so that we can find out that what is the difference in the percent saturation. Air, when it is entering inside the lungs, it is 21% saturated with oxygen. When it goes out, it is 16% saturated. So there is a 4% decrease. Carbon dioxide is 0.04% saturated in the air. But when air goes out, this is 4% saturated with carbon dioxide. Nitrogen, as we know, has nothing to do with the respiration. When air comes in, it is saturated by nitrogen by 79%, and when it goes out, that is exhaled air, also have 79% saturation. The water vapors, these are variable initially when they enter inside the lungs. That is, in inhaled air, they are variable. But when they go out, the air is saturated with the water vapors, because we know that the whole, all the surfaces which are present inside the respiratory tract, they are all moist. So when air goes out, it is saturated with water vapors. So this was all about respiration. Respiration in plants, in animals, differences between cellular and organismic respiration, and then a detail about the human respiratory system. I hope you understand what we talked about today, and we will meet in the next lecture. Thank you.